Hello everyone, today we're going to go check out some Azure Active Directory and the things that we need to know about Azure Active Directory for our AZ-104 exam. So let's begin. Here on my whiteboard I have a series of things that we're going to cover today. First of all, on top of this, we're going to go and check out how to create some users and groups within Azure Active Directory and the different types of users and groups that we find. So let's get straight into that. I have here my Azure Active Directory environment. On this Active Directory environment, you will see a number of things. One of those being that this is a domain for me, michaelwhitehouse.co.uk. Yes, I own.co.uk, and yes, I own.com as well. I don't really have much hooked up to this because it is my test environment, but it's good for me to go and show you some users. So if we come here into users inside Azure Active Directory, they're a little bit different to what you find on site because they're a little easier to create and there's less old stuff inside there. For example, if you use on-site Active Directory, you will find references to things like telex machines. No telex machines in here. So I have a few users, Bob, Mark, Michael Whitehouse, Tracy and Mike Admin. I'm going to create a new user. So if you want to create a new user in Active Directory, come up here into new user and we've got create new user or invite external user. Let's go through the process of creating a new user. This you will need to know for your AZ-104. So a couple of options down here. First of all, we can create a new user. Let's call him Dave. And we have to choose a domain. Remember, this is actually my custom domain. This is my default domain. Everybody will have a default domain in Azure Active Directory. I'm going to call this person Dave. And his first name is going to be Dave. And his last name is going to be Smith. Now, Dave needs a password. I can auto-generate a password or create a password for him. Either way, if I do either of these things, he will need to change his password when he first logs in, irrelevant of what I set here. We have Dave's password here and his auto-generated password. I will copy that and I will paste that into my notepad because I might need it for the future. Make sure here to set the usage location. This is a very, very important option to set. If you do not set a usage location, things like MFA will not work. Okay? We don't necessarily need to give him job titles or departments. We can do that later. And let's go and create this user account. It will not take too long to create. And we have now here, if we refresh, now we have Dave created inside our Azure Active Directory environment, and we can click on his account and we can see that Dave has a member account and it's called dave@michaelwhitehouse.co.uk, and he could log in now directly with that account to our Azure portal environment, or we could actually log into other services. This is the equivalent of something like a Microsoft account for aspects of licensing. So what else do we need to do? We need to drop back here and look at the second thing on that list, which is groups. So how do we create groups? Click on groups, very easy. If we create a new group, there are multiple types of groups that we can create. So these you'll need to know. For example, there are security groups and Office 365 groups. The difference between these is that a security group actually can be used for access control lists and access to resources in Azure, whereas an Office 365 group, or in here, sorry, a Microsoft 365 group, as they like to call it now, actually gets an email address attached to it, and this can be used for Teams or for shared mailboxes. So I'm going to create a standard security group here, and I'm going to name this group UK people. That's fine. We can have a group membership type here of assigned. If we click on this, there is two types. There is actually assigned membership or dynamic membership that you can actually do. Now, dynamic membership, you actually need an upgraded version of Azure AD to do. My Azure Active Directory environment here is actually on the Azure AD free tier. But if you upgrade to Azure Active Directory Premium P1 or Premium P2, you can choose to create dynamic membership groups. What dynamic membership groups allow you to do is this. Notice here that dynamic groups for Active Directory are available with Azure AD Premium P1 or above. And what dynamic groups allow you to do is actually insert an expression for group membership, and this will automatically add or remove people from a group dependent on the attributes of that user account. For example, if Bob has a location of London and we had a group that said London users and actually had the attribute of user.location equals London, Bob would automatically be added into that group and be taken out of that group if that attribute actually changes. But remember, that is an Azure AD Premium P1 feature. So dropping back here to this group assignment, I can now add members to this group, and I could add people like Dave and select him right here. We could also add group owners. Group owners, if I selected somebody like, for example, Tracy would be able to have administrative ability over this group and be able to add and remove people from this group as she wishes. Let's go and create that group here. Very, very simple. And again, if I refresh a couple of times, sometimes it doesn't actually turn up. You have to remember when you're creating users and creating groups in Azure Active Directory, there is a lot of replication that occurs behind this, and sometimes it takes a couple of minutes for it to actually appear in the interface. If all else fails, all you need to do is drop back and go back in again, and that will refresh the interface. There we go. We can see UK people is now actually created here. And if we go into this group, we can note that the members of this group should be Dave. Eventually that will actually create. And the members of this group have Dave inside it. So that scratches off the first thing we need to look at, which is creating users and groups. In fact, there is one more point about this, and that's actually how to do this via CLI and how to do this via PowerShell. You won't be expected to actually write commands within the Azure AZ-104 exam, but you do need to know the commands themselves. I wouldn't worry too much about this, primarily because these are the kind of commands we're dealing with. So for example, in Azure CLI, it's AZ-AD user create, and in PowerShell, it's new Azure AD user. They're both pretty human readable commands, and you won't be expected to type them yourself. So moving on into the next section, how to manage licenses in Azure Active Directory. Very, very simple. In fact, there are many licensing tools out there, but from the AZ-104 level, all we need to know is the fact that we can come in here and we can find our Azure Active Directory environment. We can find a user, and within that user themselves, we can actually come in and select, say for example Dave, our user that we just created. We can click on licenses on the left hand side, and if we click on licenses and click on add assignments, we can assign licenses from here, any licenses that we will have actually purchased. This is my personal Azure account, so it doesn't have any available licenses on it. What you can also do secondary to this is not just assign licenses to individual users, but you could also assign licenses to groups. So you could come into, for example, UK people, and you could click on licenses here and click on assignments. Now, if you assign a license here, everybody within that group will get that license assignment. But here is a bit of a worry for the exam. It only goes one layer down. Anybody more than one layer down in nested groups won't get that license. The example is here. So for example, if I have a group and I have a group, and inside that group I have user A and I have user B, and then inside that group I also have another group, so a group inside a group, which is possible, and inside there I have users C and users D. And now I assign licenses. So if I have, for example, a series of Office 365 or Microsoft 365 licenses, and I assign those to this group, only A and B are going to be receiving those licenses. C and D, which are part of the nested group, will not receive any licenses. It's only one layer deep. That can really catch you out. There will be a couple of questions on that point. So remember that. Hey everybody, button down in the middle, you know where it is. Subscribe, that's the one you want to press. I'll hang around and wait for you. Have you done it yet? What about now? That button right there, you know the one. Go on, click it, and let's get on with the video. So now we can scratch off managing licenses in Azure AD from our list and move on to creating administrative units. So creating administrative units. If you want to create an administrative unit in Azure Active Directory, it's very, very simple to do. Just drop up here into your default directory or into whatever directory you have. Go into administrative units on the left hand side. and on administrative units, click add. We can go and add and name this whatever we want. So we could call this, for example, users that are critical. We could assign roles to that administrative unit. So we could assign a groups administrator or a teams administrator or a user administrator to the admin unit. And all we do is review and create it. That's all. We can then come into one of these administrative units and we could add members into here, either users or groups, or we could add devices into these administrative units that can then be administered. So what do we need to know for the AZ-104? Very, very simple. Notice that this is actually taking a flat structure. So Azure Active Directory has all of your users, all of your groups on one flat structure. We don't have organizational units like you would have in a local Active Directory scenario. And this transfers that, or doesn't transfer it, translates it, allowing you to subdivide it a little more. So you can see in this example, administrative units get divided into things like School of Business and School of Engineering, a security team and an executive team, with people like the group's admin and the help desk admin being assigned to those users. So it allows you to scope your environment up a little bit like what you would have done with an organizational unit design. For the AZ-104, they will probably catch you out on this line here, which states that using administrative units requires a P1 license for each admin unit administrator, okay, and an AD-free license for each admin unit member. So just bear that one in mind. Probably going to catch you out on a question there. So that's administrative units. Let's go and have a look at managing user and group properties. So this one's quite simple. If we just drop here into the Azure portal itself, go into users, we can see that we have Bob, Dave, Mark, Tracy, and so on and so forth. So if I pop into Bob, we can see here is all of Bob's properties. And if we click on edit properties, we can go and change those properties from here. There is actually many, many more properties in this edit properties list than you actually see in the initial overview here for Bob. What we might also want to do is change some of this information by using Cloud Shell as well, and by using Azure AD CLI or by using the Azure PowerShell interface. Okay, so to do this in PowerShell, first of all, we need to do connect -Azure AD, and then we can run a command like this. For example, we can run get-Azure AD user, where display name is equal to not username, but in this case is equal to Bob, because we want to affect the Bob account. Now we're subselecting just that one account. If on the other hand we ran get-Azure AD user on its own, we would actually retrieve all of the accounts that are in Azure Active Directory. So once we've got that one single account, what we can do is we can go and have a look at some of the properties of that account itself. So let's go and do that as a format list, and we can see we've got many different properties inside here. So currently he's set to a city of Oslo, and we should be able to see that down here with city of Oslo. If on the other hand we clear this information off, retype that command and pipe this to set-Azure AD user. Notice these are the two commands that we actually need to remember: get Azure AD user and set Azure AD user. And then we want to actually go and set his city to maybe, for example, London down there. And that should change Bob's city here from Oslo, if we refresh it, to London. On this same topic, just as an extra additional here, another command you really need to be aware of for this exam is add Azure AD group member with object ID and reference object ID in here. This object ID is actually the object ID of a user account, and this reference object ID is actually going to be the object ID of the group that you're trying to add it to. So you also need to bear in mind that you need to remember the Azure AD group member command here to add a user to a group. So moving on to the next section, let's go and have a look at managing device settings and device identity. Now we are completed with managing users and groups. So to manage Azure devices, or devices that are registered or joined to Azure, come in here into the Azure environment, click on the devices section, and you will be able to see the overview of all the devices in your environment. Again, this is just my test environment, so there isn't really anything connected inside here. If I go to total devices, I only have a virtual machine that I was playing with before. This is where you can actually go and enable, or more to the point, disable a specific device to stop it gaining access to any Azure AD resources. You could also from here click on BitLocker keys, and you can go and retrieve BitLocker keys for devices that are Azure AD joined and that you actually have control over. If you want additional control over devices, we actually lead into these in additional courses like the MD100 and the MD101, which is to do with device management, deploying operating systems, deploying apps, and deploying other services to things like laptops and desktops in the environment. For the AZ-104, we just need to know that this device overview is here, and we can see our compliant and our non-compliant devices, and we can see our unmanaged devices and our BitLocker keys available to us. Let's have a look at the section for performing bulk updates. This section for performing bulk updates is literally how to upload lots of people at once. Now, to be honest, in the real world, I can't really see many use cases for this, but if you want to do it over here inside Active Directory, if we go into users, there is an option that says bulk operations. We can do bulk invites of guest accounts. We could also do bulk creation or bulk deletion in here. If you do something like a bulk create, what you actually have to do is download a CSV file. That CSV file actually looks like this. In fact, it has a number of different settings inside here that you need to populate in this specific format. Once you've done this and you have loaded in a number of users within this CSV file, you can literally just upload it directly here, and it will automatically create the accounts based on what you have populated. That's all. You don't need to know how to do that through PowerShell. You don't need to know how to script that. You just need to know that to do a bulk upload, first of all, you have to download a template CSV file, populate it, and then upload that template CSV file. Over onto the next section, let's have a look at managing guest accounts. If we want to add guests into our Azure AD environment, it's very easy to do. Go into new user and click on invite external user. If you're inviting an external user, you can put anybody inside here with any domain they actually want. So let's make an example up here. Let's do Michelle, and let's do michelle.s.blank at gmail.com, and let's do Michelle blank and say, would you like to be part of my Azure AD? I can invite that user and they will receive an email. Over here in Gmail, we can see that invitation that was sent from domain michaelwhitehouse.co.uk. Would you like to be part of my Azure AD? And I can choose to accept that invitation right here. If I accept that invitation, I will then be able to log into this Azure AD environment with my Gmail account. We've detected some activity that violates the service and agreement and have locked your account. Okay. I don't know why they've locked the account on here, but what you will be able to see eventually is you'll be able to see that guest account listed down here as Michelle, and the user principal name is michelle.s.blanc, and then you've got this ext for external. Okay, so all guest accounts have this ext on them. If you ever see a list of user accounts, we can pick out the guest accounts really easily by seeing that on there. That's how we can add a guest account directly into Azure Active Directory. Very, very simple, very, very easy. We could also do that again through a bulk system via a CSV as well. The final thing we want to have a look at is configuring self-service password resets, allowing our users to reset their own passwords in Azure AD. So to do that, what we need to do is drop back into this default directory, scroll down to password reset, and inside password reset, we can turn it on here. Now, my self-service password reset is not enabled for my account, and I actually need to enable Azure AD Premium for this to actually work. So for the final section, let's go check out self-service password resets. Now to do this, again, I need Azure AD Premium to be able for it to function. So I'm going to jump over to this account right here, which is a different test account that actually has Azure AD Premium P2 enabled. To turn on self-service password reset, all you need to do is pop down here into password reset, and in password reset, turn this thing on. You can turn it on for all users. You can turn it on for selected users and groups. If you turn it on for all users, bear this in mind, the next time that every single user is going to log on, they will receive a prompt screen that will tell them to register for self-service password reset. If you have 1,000 users, you then have 1,000 users who the next time they log on get a prompt screen and they don't know what it does because people don't read what's on the screen. Your help desk will be flooded. Make sure to brief people before you turn this thing on. Once you've done that, you can click into registration and you can decide on how you actually want to do the registration. So require the users to register when signing in. Yes, number of days users will be asked to reconfirm is 180 days. And we can set up how this is actually going to work. So the authentication methods, we've got 1 or 2 authentication methods. This works just like any other self-service password system you have used on the internet. So if you forgot your password before, which you have, and you click forgotten password, there's a number of things that could happen. You could get an email, you could get, for example, a mobile phone app code if your mobile phone has been registered. You could also do security questions as well, and you can do quite extensive security questions here in Azure AD. So if we choose security questions, we can say, for example, the number of questions required to register is 5 and the required to reset might be 3. So if we come in here and select these questions, we can create predefined questions like what city was your first job, what's your favorite food, what's your oldest sibling's middle name. These are questions that the users will be able to choose themselves. You can also create custom questions yourself that might be relevant to your company. The users can't create their own custom questions, though. You get to create them as the administrator. Turn that on, and then users can reset their own passwords. It literally is that simple. So that kind of concludes these sections here for the Managing Azure AD Objects component of the AZ-104 exam. I hope you enjoyed this section and you'll join me next time. And here's the normal outro. And you know the routine, hashtag like and subscribe. And I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me next time. Goodbye.